The Rangers-Flyers rookie series is upon us, and we are telling you why Brennan Othmann must have a strong showing.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1377 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, a lot to do here. The Rangers-Flyers two-game rookie series is indeed upon us. In fact, Rangers rookie camp is upon us even quicker because that's going to be beginning on Wednesday. My understanding is that the Ranger rookies will have camp on Wednesday. They'll have camp on Thursday. And then you've got the two games against the Flyers rookies on Friday and Saturday. So definitely looking forward to all that. And a lot to talk about, a lot of players that I think are certainly worth keeping an eye on during the proceedings, all of camp, but specifically those two games against the Flyers, and perhaps none more so than former first-round pick Brennan Othmann. I would think, you look at the Ranger roster, you look at the players that are going to be competing in training camp and in these two games against the Flyer rookies, and you kind of look around and I'm interested to see this guy, and that guy's kind of intriguing, and I wonder if that guy can make the Rangers. But I think the guy that stands out, the guy that arguably is under the most pressure to perform throughout this entire camp and throughout certainly the two games against the Flyers as well, I think is none other than Brennan Othmann. I don't even really think it's close. There are a couple of reasons why I think he's really under a microscope here and why I'm going to be fixated on Othmann. And I think a lot of you will as well. We begin with the obvious, the very simple fact that Brennan Othmann was a first-round pick by this New York Ranger team. That's first and foremost. But he was also a first-round pick 4 years ago. Now, he's going to be 23 in January. It's not ancient. It's not like everybody in NHL history is a complete finished product at the age of 22 and they're already, smashing records and doing all these amazing things. But I think you're also getting to the point here where, okay, this guy's still in rookie camp, and the Rangers drafted him 4 years ago, and they drafted him in the first round. This is somebody that the Rangers brought in to be a big-time difference maker, hopefully one of the pillars of Ranger hockey going forward. And, you could say that about anybody that any team drafts in the first round, and I understand that. But I think if the Rangers are being truthful, if you were to ask them this question, did you think Brennan Othmann would still be participating in rookie camp 4 years after you drafted him? I think they probably would have said no. The expectation would have been that he sort of, quote unquote, graduated from the team and that he would basically be an opening night roster lock at the very worst, and maybe a difference maker, already a bona fide difference maker at the very best. So that's first and foremost, just the draft status and the fact that, okay, come on, it's time to become an NHL regular. We are getting into that territory, I think at least a little bit for Brennan Othmann. I think another reason why Othmann is under pressure to perform and why there's so much riding on Othmann's performance in these two games is that he has thus far had an underwhelming start to his NHL career. And I realize there are multiple factors when it comes to, the reasons why that is the case. First and foremost, you can look at the very simple fact that he was not really put into a position to succeed this past season. He's played 25 career NHL games. 22 of them came this past season. And the Rangers were a mess. We know that. He didn't really get any kind of valuable minutes. He was typically out there, on the fourth line or maybe the third line in some instances. But still, I think for a former first rounder and somebody that the Rangers are very high on, and they've said to be very high on, why wouldn't they be? He's a first round pick. But 25 games, no goals, 2 assists. Your eyebrows do go up at least a little bit at that. He is a +7 in that time, and he does tend to play a very physical brand of hockey, even at the NHL. But the scoring just has not been there, even though it has been there pretty much every other place that he's ever played in his life. This guy is a bona fide sniper. He's got a nasty shot, and at least thus far, limited time, of course, but that has not yet translated to NHL hockey. Another reason that I think we're all going to be keeping our eyes on Brennan Othmann and why there's pressure on him to perform I thought he was a little bit underwhelming during last year's rookie camp because, of course, this has become an annual tradition. I believe this is now the 4th straight season that the Rangers and Flyers are doing this 2-game rookie series, whatever you want to call it. And, Othmann wasn't terrible in last year's series. I think he might have even scored a goal. But overall, watching those 2 games between the Ranger rookies and the Flyer rookies around this same time last year, I just didn't feel like he was a big-time bona fide standout. He didn't really jump off the screen one way or another. Again, there was nothing overly alarming or anything like that. But going into the rookie series last year, the 2 Rangers that I was really looking forward to watching, the 2 that I was really expecting big things from, were Brennan Othmann and Brett Berard. And to be honest, I was left a little bit underwhelmed by both of them. Now, Berard, I'm still a huge fan of his, and he also made it to the Rangers this past season. And all things considered, when you consider ice time and just the situation the Rangers were in last year, I thought Berard had a pretty solid showing overall this past season. But even with that being the case, yeah, I thought those 2 didn't really jump off the screen in this rookie series. But that also lets you know that, this 2-game series is not a death sentence or anything like that if you don't happen to play your absolute best. But I think we are getting to the point where you're hoping for, more from Brennan Othmann than what we've seen overall, the 2-game rookie series last year and everything he did in the regular season for the Rangers as well. I felt like last year the stars were Adam Edstrom and Victor Mancini. Those 2 really played well in this 2-game rookie set, and the proof was in the pudding because both of them ended up making the Rangers opening night roster this past season. Mancini was subsequently traded as part of the JT Miller deal, but the point stands. Obviously, those 2 stood out in a major way and greatly improved their stock, and they were rewarded with opening night roster spots because of it. And we hope for, obviously, similar results here from Brennan Othmann, because you got to believe that at this point, the Rangers really, really want Brennan Othmann to make the team. My understanding is that he is still waiver exempt. So if he doesn't make the team, they could send him to the Wolfpack. He's not exposed to waivers. Everything's all good. You can call him up when you need him. But you got to believe at this point, they're hoping that Brennan Othmann takes the bull by the horns and makes this team straight out of training camp. And I think that begins, obviously, with this 2-game rookie set here. And I mentioned Brett Berard a second ago, and that's an interesting comparison in its own right, because Berard and Othmann are sort of in similar situations as far as, their age and where they are with their development, and both coming into training camp needing to make the New York Rangers. I don't think anything's to be handed to either one of them as far as a spot in the NHL roster. But to take the comparisons a step further, Berard was drafted only 1 year before Brennan Othmann. Berard was a 5th rounder, whereas Othmann was a 1st rounder. Berard is only about 4 months older than Brennan Othmann. And Othmann has played 25 games in the NHL compared to 35 games for Brett Berard in the NHL. Why do I bring this all up? Well, very simple. Brett Berard is not participating in rookie camp. He's not there. And that, to me, would certainly seem to signify that the Rangers believe that Brett Berard has graduated from this and that he's got the inside track to an opening night roster spot, and they feel comfortable enough with his development where they don't feel the need to throw him out there in rookie camp, have him competing against 18 and 19-year-olds. Not that Berard's significantly older than players such as that, but you get the idea here. It feels like the fact that Berard is not in this camp, that he's not going to be playing in this games, that to me feels like a vote of confidence from the Rangers in Brett Berard. But we get no similar circumstances. We get no similar treatment from the Rangers to Brennan Othmann. That, to me, tells me that the Rangers still believe that Brennan Othmann has something to prove, and he has not yet graduated from this. Now, I understand, again, Berard has played 35 games in the NHL compared to 25 by Brennan Othmann, but for something like this, I don't think there's an actual cutoff. It's designed, obviously, for younger players, but I don't think the Flyers are going to care if Brett Berard plays in this tournament or not. They're not going to make a big thing about it. This is a mutually beneficial series here, these 2 games. And to me, that just comes down to the Rangers' decision. They feel like Brett Berard has graduated from this type of a thing, and Brennan Othmann has not. And the proof is in the pudding, once again, because Berard is not participating in this rookie camp. Brennan Othmann, 4 years after the Rangers drafted him, he still is. I think another, just overall reason why there's pressure to perform for Brennan Othmann is very simply their high expectations on Othmann for this upcoming season and beyond. When you draft somebody in the first round, you're looking at them to be a pillar of your franchise. You're looking at them to provide a big-time impact in the relatively short term and certainly the long term. And I'm really hoping that when the puck drops for these games, I hope that Brennan Othmann is a big-time standout in a positive way. Doesn't mean that he has to stuff the score sheet every single night. He needs like 5 goals and 4 assists in the 2 games. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, some scoring would be nice for sure. I think that could certainly improve Othmann's confidence, and it'll probably help us along a little bit too if we see Othmann beginning to put the puck in the net a little bit more often. But I feel like one way or another, Othmann needs to be noticeable out there. Othmann is somebody that the Rangers drafted because he had a very interesting blend of skill and snarl. The kind of blend that does not grow on trees. The kind of blend that causes you to get drafted in the first round of the NHL draft. And that's what made him such an intriguing prospect to so many teams, including the New York Rangers, who obviously drafted him. And now you look at the situation that he's in. Again, 4 years after he's drafted, if you look at the rosters of both of these teams, Brennan Othmann is the one that should be out there essentially as the best player. He should be the guy that's going out there and dominating, because you look at the draft pedigree, former first rounder overall, he's somebody that has some NHL experience. Not too many players in this camp have really any NHL experience. If you look at the Ranger roster this year, you've got Othmann, you've got Perreault, and you've got Morrow. To my knowledge, I believe those are the only 3 that have experience in NHL games in the regular season. And so that being the case, Othmann should be ahead of these guys. He should be ahead of players that the Flyers drafted this year, of players that the Flyers drafted last year. So he should really stand out in a positive way. He should go out there and dominate. And even if he's not letting up the score sheet like we were talking about a second ago, he should at least be in the middle of everything, because these games are high intensity. And you can understand why. There's players on both sides that are trying to take that next step. The Rangers have some big prospects, and they're trying to make the team out of training camp. There's guys that maybe are a little bit under the radar for either the Rangers or the Flyers, and they have to figure out a way to make an impression. So these guys compete hard. There's fights. I mean, there's nastiness, there's chippiness, everything you'd expect in an NHL game, and then some. And these are young players too, so they're obviously trying to turn the heads of the front office members of their respective teams. Brennan Othmann's no exception. So even if he's not lighting up the score sheet, we got to see Othmann get involved physically, maybe some extracurricular stuff after the play. I'm not saying to take a run at somebody or do something dumb or dirty or anything like that. But Brennan Othmann, again, he's that guy that's known for playing with some bleep you. And that being the case, it'd be nice to see some of that on display. Go out there and, be the bully, because you're kind of the big dog in the yard if you're Brennan Othmann at this point and you're playing in these rookie games here. So that's what I'm hoping for Brennan Othmann. I think it would be certainly very encouraging if we were to see anything of the like from him in this series, and I think we will. I think Brennan Othmann, by no means am I panicking as far as like how he's going to work out with the Rangers or anything like that, but I think all of us could use a strong showing from Brennan Othmann in these 2 games, and we'll see what happens, but I'm certainly going to be watching him very closely. And in just a second, going to get to some other players we'll be watching very closely, including a few who are trying to make the Rangers out of training camp, namely Scott Morrow, Gabe Perreault, maybe a couple of others as well. We'll get to them in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is the best because it fits however you'd like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action is unfolding. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it is the best way to add more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for continuing to support the podcast. In our next episode, it's going to be happening on Friday, but we're actually going to wait until Friday night because we're talking about this 2-game rookie series between the Rangers and the Flyers. Game 1 is Friday night at 7:05. Game 2 is going to be Saturday night, at 5:05. And with that being the case, I figure Friday's episode, let's watch the game together. Hopefully one of these 2 teams will stream it, and we'll come back with some thoughts a little bit later that night. Might even do a live episode. We will see. But let's go ahead and continue to keep everything rolling here, continue to preview, obviously, this Ranger rookie camp, and specifically the 2-game set against the Flyer rookies. And we talked about Othmann for quite some time there. He's not the only Ranger that could really use a strong showing in camp. I think a couple of guys that really stand out right off the bat. Kind of obvious choices, but certainly we're talking about they're going to be Scott Morrow, Gabe Perreault. You can maybe even throw Dylan Robrick into this mix as well. But to me, Morrow and Perreault, along with obviously Othmann, who we just talked about, they're the ones that have, a strong chance of making the Ranger roster, or at least a fighting chance of making the Ranger roster out of training camp. And it all starts here. You can turn some heads in these two games and in the rookie camp as a whole. I think with Morrow, he's probably, I don't know. I was going to say he's got the best chance of any of them, but really Morrow, Othmann, and Perreault, they're all kind of in the same boat, in the same mix right now. Obviously, Morrow's the only defenseman of that trio, but you've got Morrow. He's played a total of 21 NHL games. He is new to the Ranger organization. Seems to be in something of a battle with Urho Vakanainen for that sixth defenseman job. When you just kind of look at the lay of the land, there's 5 Ranger defensemen that I think we're pretty confident are going to be in the lineup on opening night, barring injuries or anything unforeseen like that. So it basically comes down to Vakanainen or Morrow. It's also possible that Morrow starts this season in the AHL. But again, it all starts now for somebody like Scott Morrow. This is a chance for him to really assert himself and really put his best foot forward in his efforts to make this team. You've also got Gabe Perreault. Now, he's obviously kind of the headline grabber and the big first-round pick from a couple of seasons ago, and obviously made his NHL debut toward the end of this past season. And he, too, is somebody that's trying to make the Ranger camp make the Ranger team out of training camp. And don't take my word for it. Gabe Perreault basically said as much a couple of days ago. There was a video of him circulating on social media, and no bones about it. I mean, his goal is absolutely to make the New York Rangers heading in to the start of this season. It also looks like he's bulked up a little bit in the offseason, which is probably a good thing. You come from the college ranks to the NHL. That's a heck of a jump, and I'm not saying that he can't handle it, but adding a little bit more muscle, I think that's certainly going to work in Gabe Perreault's favor. So we'll be keeping an eye on him. And I think also you look at somebody like Dylan Robrick. He's become a favorite of mine over the past couple of seasons here. 6'7" and 205 pounds. Definitely going to be keeping an eye on him during this 2-game rookie set here. And granted, it will be very difficult to miss him, but a very intriguing prospect who's really come along, I don't want to say out of nowhere, because, people are on top of Ranger prospects. Ranger fans are very passionate about this team. They want to know who's doing what in what league and who might be a dark horse to eventually make the Rangers become an impact player. But Robrick's stock has increased significantly, I would say, in about the past calendar year or so. He made his first, got his first taste of pro hockey this past season with the Hartford Wolfpack, excluding one playoff game that he played with the Pack the season before that. But for all intents and purposes, this was really his first run at pro hockey. And he ends up as a rookie, 6th-round rookie with the Hartford Wolfpack, 20 goals, 14 assists, for a total of 34 points in 72 games. That's not a staggering point total, but when you've got a 6th-round rookie who's just getting started, just getting his first taste of pro hockey, he ends up leading his AHL team with 20 goals. That's very, very impressive. And obviously, size doesn't slump. We know that. He's somebody that I think in a very short amount of time has become a very, very intriguing prospect for the New York Rangers. And does he have a chance to make the team out of training camp? Never say never. Never say never. We've been surprised by things like this in the past. Guys have made the team that we weren't necessarily expecting. And I still think it would be an upset if he was to make the Rangers. But this is somebody that is coming along nicely. He plays a physical game and somebody that does seem to be an exciting prospect. He's in that same group of players with, Rempe and Edstrom. All 3 of them are Giants. All 3 of them were taken by the Rangers in the 6th round. So it's worked out pretty well with Edstrom and Rempe. The book is still out on both of them, but if nothing else, they do seem to have carved out, 4th-line roles for themselves at the NHL level, so that's very encouraging. And we'll see if we can go 3 for 3 here as far as Giants that the Rangers have taken in the 6th round of the NHL draft. We'll see what Robrick can do. And again, it all begins with a strong showing in this rookie series. I mentioned Perreault a second ago. There's one other thing that I got to mention as it pertains to Gabe Perreault. Everybody needs to slow down in their judgment of Gabe Perreault. I shouldn't say everybody, but we've talked quite a bit in this offseason, doing all these episodes of Locked On New York Rangers, even in some of the slower months of the summer, where we kind of hone in on the prospects and their development and what's going on and are they going to make the team and all this good stuff. And I'm seeing some comments about like, oh man, I really don't like Gabe Perreault's game. Guys, Gabe Perreault was on the New York Rangers for 5 games last season. 5 games. he was thrust into basically a dumpster fire. We all know how bad the Rangers were this past season. I don't want to like overly rehash that again, but you guys all know what I'm talking about. And he wasn't going to come in and just set the world on fire right away. I mean, there is a little bit of a transitional phase there, going from college straight into the NHL. And with all that said, that's also, I've talked about this before too, but that's also why I would like to see Gabe Perreault begin this upcoming season in the AHL with the Wolfpack. I know there's some people that just want to throw him into the deep end and sink or swim, and hey, maybe he'll hit the ground running in the NHL, and certainly that is possible, and I can appreciate that Gabe Perreault, that's certainly his goal, but we've seen the Rangers rush prospects in the past. It hasn't always worked out. I'd like to see Gabe Perreault get that little bit of a bridge from college hockey to the NHL by playing in the AHL with the Wolfpack. Again, even if it's for only 15, 20, 25 games, if he lights up the AHL and the Rangers have a role for him, by all means call him up. But I don't want the Rangers to jump the gun here. But regardless of how they look to play it, regardless of whether Perreault ends up making the opening night roster or not, certainly he's a player that I think all of us are very intrigued by, and certainly we will all be watching very closely when the puck drops for these two rookie games between the Rangers and the Flyers. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. We're going to go a little bit deeper into the Ranger prospect pool, talk about a couple of dark horses that maybe have a chance to either make the Rangers, or even if they don't make the Rangers, at least turn some heads, at least, as we've been talking about throughout this episode, improve their stock within the Rangers organization. There's definitely some intriguing names that are sort of deeper cuts, shall we say. But we'll get to them in just a second. And also just going to talk about why these games are so important and why, if you haven't watched them in the past, might be a good idea to tune in for them this season. And then again, they are Friday at 7:05 and Saturday at 5:05. Fingers crossed that one or both of these teams actually streams the games. If that happens, I will provide that link to you guys as well. But we'll talk about all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking a little bit about some of the dark horse Ranger prospects. Maybe some of you guys have your eye on some of these guys that I'm going to mention as well. That's certainly possible, but this kind of goes from that top level down to like that middle level of Ranger prospect guys that, will probably end up playing in the NHL, or at least have a chance to play in the NHL at some point, but they're not really the headline grabbers. They're not really the main eventers. We'll actually get to that in just a second, but I also just want to acknowledge something here about the games themselves. I think it's easy to kind of sleep on these games if you're a Ranger fan. And I get that to a degree. Maybe you just feel like, well, a lot of these guys are never going to play in the NHL, or I don't even know some of these guys, or these games don't count in the standings. I understand that kind of sentiment, but these games are really important. And I've alluded to this throughout the episode, but if you don't believe me when I say that these games are important, ask Adam Edstrom. Now, Edstrom, prior to last year's rookie series, he had already made his debut, NHL debut, that is, with the New York Rangers the season before that. But Edstrom going into training camp last season and going into this rookie series, I had him at less than 50-50 of making the Rangers opening night roster, and he basically tore it up in these games against the Flyers. I want to say he had like 3 goals. He was physical in those games, maybe an assist in there somewhere as well, but he stood out as much or more than anybody. And lo and behold, that continues into training camp with the Rangers. It continues into the preseason. It continues into the regular season when Adam Edstrom did indeed make the Rangers out of training camp. And if you still don't believe me, you can ask Victor Mancini as well. Now, you might have to travel to Vancouver for that because he, of course, was part of the deal for JT Miller. But he, too, was somebody that, fifth round pick, and okay, we got this rookie series. He wasn't somebody that I really like circled on the roster, and I got to keep an eye on Victor Mancini. But man, did he pop when we were watching him during these two games last offseason during this rookie series. He really jumped off the screen in a positive way, just very, very steady, very consistent, got involved offensively a little bit as well, and ends up making the Rangers team. Now, if you really want a crazy domino effect, you could argue that Mancini's performance in those two rookie series games against the Flyers last year, it actually led to the JT Miller trade. Because now it might have happened either way. It's possible the Rangers would have been able to get JT Miller away from the Canucks one way or another. The Canucks were basically desperate to move on from either him or Pettersson, and it ends up being JT Miller. But Miller had the full no-move clause. He wanted to come back to the Rangers. The Rangers got him for less than they should have been able to get him for. It was a first, it was Philip Hedl, and it was Victor Mancini. And apparently the Canucks really wanted Braden Schneider. The Rangers wouldn't budge there, but they wanted a big defenseman. They got Victor Mancini. Would the Canucks have been as interested in Victor Mancini if Mancini did not play well in this two-game rookie series, which then led to Mancini making the Rangers out of training camp? Now, that was partially due to an injury to Ryan Lindgren, but he still made the team fair and square and played fairly well, I thought, during limited time with the New York Rangers. So he at least got some NHL game action on tape, and he's in this package to the Canucks for the Rangers to reacquire JT Miller. It's a crazy domino effect that may have started in the two-game rookie series between the Rangers and the Flyers. That's pretty crazy to think about. And if you want to go back even further, you can even ask somebody like Matt Rempe. People are obviously split on Matt Rempe, and I can understand that. But 4 years ago in this rookie series, he ends up dropping the gloves and fighting Wade Allison in one of the two games. That was Rempe's first fight in a Rangers sweater. And you know what happened? It's barely a blip on the radar. Barely anybody even notices it. But Matt Rempe, one way or another, has found a way to make it to the NHL. Seems like he's going to stick there and is an effective player. He's a controversial player at times for sure. I know there's some Ranger fans that love him. There's some Ranger fans out there that can't stand him. I understand all that. But he initially made an impact in this rookie series. And obviously fighting has been part of his game going forward. And like I said, that was his first fight as a member of the New York Rangers, an unofficial fight, but a fight nevertheless. So you look at all this, all these examples, and there's probably more than just those three that I just mentioned, but you got to figure, at least one or two players on this Ranger team are going to significantly improve their stock based on how they do in these two games. It's very exciting. And something else that I love about it is that it comes without the pressure of the games actually counting. I mean, they count for the individual players, sure, but they don't count in the NHL standings, obviously. So you can watch this kind of stress-free and all that rookie looks good, and maybe I'm expecting a little bit more from that guy, whatever it might be. It's a very fun watch, very casual watch, but an exciting watch to be sure. So with all that said, let's get to the dark horses. Let's get to some of the Ranger prospects, that aren't necessarily the headline grabbers, but a little bit deeper dives here. I'm going to start with Artem Gonchar. Gonchar is a lefty defenseman. He goes 6 feet tall, 157 pounds. More on that in just a second. But the reason he kind of intrigues me, a couple of reasons, but the first one is that he is the highest Ranger draft pick from the class of 2025, this summer, obviously, that will be participating in this rookie camp and in these two games against the Philadelphia Flyers. He was selected in the third round. You've got a couple of guys that were drafted before Gonchar, but Malcolm Spence was taken in the second round. Sean Barnhill was also taken in the third round. Those two were playing at their respective colleges, University of Michigan and Michigan State. So that obviously explains why the two of them are not there. But Gonchar is slated to play for the Sudbury Wolves of the OHL for this upcoming season. And he is actually one of only two players in this year's draft class for the Rangers that are going to be participating in camp. The other one is Evan Passmore. He's a righty defenseman that the Rangers took in the sixth round this year. He's somebody to watch maybe too. But as far as Gonchar is concerned, 5'6" and 157 pounds. I know certain people are going to be listening to this. They hear the weight, they hear the size, and they're immediately out on Gonchar. And I can understand that to a degree. I mean, that is like minuscule for an NHL defenseman. So I get it. But he is basically the only Ranger draftee of this summer that is, or that has below average size. For the most part, the Rangers went with guys that were 6 feet and taller. They did get a bigger draft class this year. Gonchar is the one exception to that rule. But Gonchar is an interesting one to me. He's said to be an offensive defenseman, and if he's going to have any chance of making it in the NHL, that's probably going to have to be a big part of his game because he can add muscle and everything, but he's never going to be as big as some of his opponents. But with all that said, Gonchar last year, while playing in the MHL, did end up with 7 goals, 18 assists for a total of 25 points in 50 games. He was also a +2. I'm very curious to see if Gonchar can bring some of his offensive skill to this 2-game rookie series. Interested to see if his lack of size is going to be an issue against some of his bigger opponents. We'll see how that goes, when the Rangers rookies are matched up against the Flyers rookies. But Gonchar is somebody I'm going to be watching. A true dark horse here. I'm going to go with Carey Terrence, a 20-year-old center, 6'1", 187 pounds. He was a former second-round pick, but it was not by the Rangers. It was by the Ducks in 2023. And Carey Terrence, if the name is kind of sounding a little bit familiar, but you can't quite place it, he was the player that the Rangers acquired in the trade of Chris Kreider. The full trade was Kreider and a 4th-rounder to the Ducks in exchange for Terrence and a 3rd-rounder going back to the Rangers. Terrence twice won gold at World Juniors with the United States. Good speeder, good skater, said to be a competitive player, good forechecker as well. Last 2 seasons with the Erie Otters combined, Terrence has 101 games, 49 goals, 42 assists for a total of 91 points in those 101 games. He was also named the captain of Erie this past season. It looks like he's going to be joining the Wolfpack this upcoming season here. Maybe we're sleeping on Terrence just a little bit. I mean, those are impressive numbers. He seems to have good size, a good all-around game as well. And I feel like one of the reasons why he's flying under the radar and why nobody's really talked about him, or at least not that much, is because, well, he was traded for Chris Kreider. Kreider was a big part of Ranger hockey. Kreider was here for 15 years. Kreider had all these clutch playoff moments, and a lot of fans are very, very attached to Chris Kreider and still don't like the trade. I feel like the trade was a necessary evil, but it gets to a point where Terrence, you kind of just see him as a throw-in or like an afterthought, and I guess in a way he is a throw-in, but I don't know, man. I mean, we're talking about a 20-year-old who's produced very well in the OHL and was a former second-round pick. So to me, he's not nothing. He's somebody that I think you should at least keep your eye on at least a little bit moving forward here. And one more that we'll throw out there, and this one maybe isn't quite as much of a dark horse as the first 2 that I just mentioned, but I'd still have him in that category, and I'm going to go with Noah Laba, 22-year-old center, 6'2", 192 pounds. He's starting to get a little bit of buzz in Ranger circles and fan circles, people that follow the prospects very closely, and that's why I kind of hesitate to make him a quote-unquote dark horse. But, I mean, I think for the most part, you could probably still throw him in there. He's not in the top 5 on most Ranger prospect lists. He might be just barely in the top 10, but we're talking about a former 4th-rounder in 2022. He spent 3 seasons at Colorado College, and he had, in the last 65 games, 30 goals, 33 assists for a total of 63 points. He also had 6 game-winning goals this past season as well, so that's obviously very encouraging. May have the clutch factor. Got to play in 11 games with the Wolfpack this past season, ended up with 3 goals and 2 assists, and was a -2 in those 11 games. That's not a terrible start to professional hockey when you're joining a Wolfpack team in the middle of their lost season, and obviously you just kind of have to hit the ground running. It is the next level up. I mean, it's not quite as dramatic as jumping into the NHL, but that's at least something of an encouraging start. And I think the reason why some people are in on Noah Laba is because it does feel like in the seasons to come here, there could be some openings as far as the Ranger forwards are concerned, and specifically that 3rd-line center spot. Nothing is really set in stone there. Some people might even think that Laba is a dark horse to actually make the Rangers out of training camp. I don't think that'll happen, but again, I would never say never. I would never rule it out. We have certainly been surprised in the past, but one way or another, we'll certainly be keeping an eye on Noah Laba during this rookie series. But I figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, it is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, @jchik17, and definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.